Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3 HR Advisors, the podcast that keeps HR pros, business leaders, and operations teams ahead of the curve. Sponsored by our friends at WorkHuman, and my name is Steve Boese. English only? How language rules could break the supply chain. Today we're looking down the highway at a major new shift in the world of commercial trucking, one that's raising eyebrows, sparking debate, and could have far-reaching consequences for the people who keep our supply chain rolling. We're talking about new and stricter English language proficiency requirements for commercial truck drivers in the U.S., and the possibility of increased penalties or even disqualification for drivers who can't demonstrate English fluency. It's a move that's being framed as a safety measure by regulators, but one that's also being called into question for its timing, its fairness, and its potential political undertones. So what's really going on here? Let's break it down. Right now in the United States, commercial truck driving is one of the most critical and often invisible jobs in the economy. We rely on these drivers for everything from food and fuel to medical supplies and mail. And it's no secret, this industry runs on diversity. According to estimates from the American Trucking Association and other industry sources, nearly 15 to 20% of the nation's truck drivers are immigrants or non-native English speakers. In fact, some states and segments of the industry, especially long-haul freight and port-related driving, that percentage is even higher. And for years, federal rules have required that commercial drivers operating in the U.S. be able to read and speak English sufficiently to converse with the general public, understand traffic signs, respond to official inquiries, and to fill out reports. But let's be honest, enforcement of that rule has been historically pretty inconsistent. If a driver could get the job done safely and reliably, many companies and inspectors tended to look the other way. But that all may be changing. Recently, there's been a noticeable uptick in federal and state-level enforcement activity around English language proficiency during roadside inspections and licensing checks. And some reports indicate that drivers are being issued out-of-service orders or citations if they are perceived not to meet the language requirements. In other words, drivers could be pulled off the road and possibly lose their livelihoods, not for unsafe driving or logbook violations, but for struggling to communicate in fluid English during an inspection. And supporters of the crackdown argue that it's about safety. Clear communication is critical in emergency situations, understanding signage, and complying with complex transportation laws. But critics point to something else: politics. Some industry watchers and civil rights advocates believe the push may be linked to the broader anti-immigrant sentiment on the rise and the rise of so-called language-first policies that disproportionately impact immigrant workers. After all, if these rules have existed for decades, why suddenly start cracking down in the middle of a truck driver shortage? And speaking of shortages, that's where this gets really interesting. We already know that the U.S. is short tens of thousands of truck drivers, and if English language enforcement gets too aggressive, we could see thousands of experienced, hard-working drivers sidelined overnight. This would be a disaster not just for them, but for companies, consumers, and the broader economy. Imagine trying to staff your supply chain during peak season only to lose a chunk of your workforce to a surprise language rule. Trucking companies are watching this all closely. Some are investing in language training programs. Others are lobbying quietly behind the scenes for more flexibility or clearer guidelines. But many are worried because they know this could shrink their labor pool and fast. And let's not forget that many of these drivers are performing exceptionally well. They're safe, reliable, and essential workers, even if their English isn't perfect. So what should leaders in business and in government be thinking about? Well, here's one take. Sure, communication matters, especially in roles where safety is on the line. But we have to be smart about how we implement and enforce the standards. Is this really about creating safety, or is it about something else? Are we improving working conditions, or just creating new barriers? And perhaps most importantly, are we ready to deal with the economic fallout if we take thousands of skilled, experienced drivers off the road at a time when we desperately need them? In today's tight labor market, every worker counts, especially the ones who do the hard jobs most of us don't see. If we want a safer, more inclusive, and more effective transportation system, we need policies that reflect the realities of the workforce, not just abstract ideals. So the next time you pass a big rig on the highway, remember this: the person behind the wheel might not speak perfect English, but they're still delivering the goods. That's all for today's Workplace Minute. Want more on the future of work, talent, and tech? Be sure to hit follow or subscribe and share this episode with a colleague who cares about getting the workplace right. And we will continue to follow this and all the important topics and trends in the world of work here on the HR Happy Hour Media Network. This has been Steve Boese for the Workplace Minute, powered by H3 HR Advisors.